You can ask an avoidant a direct question and watch them pause. Eyes flicker, a silence that hangs just a beat too long, and still nothing real comes out. They'll give you half a sentence, maybe a vague shrug, a deflection dressed up as thoughtfulness, and you'll tell yourself they're just private, or maybe they need more time. But here's the thing. No one tells you some questions don't just go unanswered because they don't want to answer. They go unanswered because the answer would shatter the version of themselves they're trying to protect. It's not that they don't know what you're asking. They know. They know exactly. But answering would mean letting you step into a room in their mind they've kept locked for years, a room even they don't like to visit. You felt it before, haven't you? That moment where you're pouring your heart out, asking for clarity, asking for honesty, asking for something real, and the other person looks at you like you're speaking a language they once knew but forgot. They fumble, they redirect, they make a joke, they change the subject, and in that moment you feel a kind of loneliness that's worse than being alone, because you are right next to them, yet they are nowhere near you. And this is where so many people get stuck. We think if we just phrase the question better, if we just wait for the right day, if we just prove how safe we are, they'll open up. But there are certain questions avoidants can't answer. Not because they're malicious and not because you're unworthy, but because answering would require them to look at truths they've been running from long before you ever showed up. The real danger isn't their silence. It's what you do in the face of it. Do you keep digging, exhausting yourself against a wall that's not moving? Or do you start reading that silence as data, as a map, showing you exactly what's possible here and what isn't? Because when you start listening to what they can't say, you'll hear everything. The first question they can set answer sounds deceptively simple. What do you need from me right now? On the surface, it's an invitation. It's a door left wide open. You're saying, tell me how to love you better. Tell me what would make you feel safe. Tell me how to meet you where you are. In a healthy connection, that question would light something up. It would create closeness. But with an avoidant, you'll often see the opposite. Their eyes drift away, their shoulders tense. They might say, I don't know, or worse, nothing, I'm fine. And if you're not careful, you'll believe them. But I don't know doesn't mean they don't know. It means they can't tell you without exposing a need they've been taught to hide. You see, for many avoidants, need equals weakness. Admitting it would mean stepping into a role they've sworn to avoid, the role of someone who could be let down. And so they've trained themselves to go without, to believe they're self-contained. The problem is that self-containment becomes a wall even you can't scale. This is where your power lies, not in trying to coax the answer out, but in noticing what happens in the space where the answer should be. If they can't articulate their needs, it's not just about this moment with you, it's about every moment before you. When they learned that speaking up didn't bring closeness, it brought risk. That silence isn't mystery, it's muscle memory. And here's the trap. You'll start over-functioning to fill the gap. Guessing, overcompensating, reading subtle cues like your survival depends on it. But every time you do, you reinforce the very dynamic you're trying to escape, the one where they hold the cards by never putting them on the table. So the shift isn't, how do I get them to answer? The shift is, if they can't tell me what they need, what does that tell me about where they are and where this can realistically go? That question isn't about them. It's about you, because sometimes the answer you're looking for isn't in their words, it's in their absence. And once you start reading absence as information, you stop feeling powerless in the face of it. Another question they can set answer is this. Why did you pull away? You ask it because you felt the change. You noticed how the text slowed down, how the warmth in their voice cooled, how their body language shifted like the door quietly clicked shut. You felt it, and you know they felt it too. So you ask not to accuse, but to understand. And what you get back? A shrug, a flat, I'm just busy. Or if they're feeling generous, it's nothing. Don't overthink it. But here's the thing. People don't pull away for no reason. They may not tell you the reason, but the reason exists. With an avoidant, that reason is rarely about something you did wrong. It's usually about the internal alarms they've built to go off the moment closeness feels too real. You see, for them, intimacy can feel like stepping onto thin ice. One more step, and they imagine it will crack. So they retreat, convincing themselves they're protecting both of you. And you're left in emotional limbo. Your nervous system starts searching for the missing pieces. You replay conversations. You wonder if you said too much, asked too much, were too much. You chase closure like it's oxygen. But here's the truth. When you ask, why did you pull away? You're not really asking for a reason. You're asking for reassurance. You're asking them to close the gap their silence opened. And in this dynamic, that reassurance rarely comes. This is why understanding the pattern is more valuable than chasing the reason. When you recognize that pulling away is their reflex, not your failure, you stop scrambling to repair something you didn't break. You start seeing the pullback as a signal, not an emergency. A signal that they've reached their internal threshold for closeness, whether they admit it or not. And the shift here is subtle but life-changing. Instead of leaning in harder when they lean out, you hold your ground, you match their space with your own, not as a punishment, but as a way of protecting your energy. You stop trying to drag someone back to the table who's decided to step away from it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to demand an answer, but to show through your actions that you're not afraid of their silence anymore. If this is landing for you, subscribe. We're just getting started. Then there steps the question that sits heavy in your chest. Do you love me? It seems like such a clear ask. 3 words, an answer of either yes or no. Maybe something in between, but with an avoidant, it's rarely that simple. You might get a vague smile, a you know how I feel, or a carefully crafted dodge like, why are you asking? And suddenly you're on the defensive, explaining why you need to hear it, why it matters to you, why you're not trying to pressure them. But the truth is, this question doesn't just ask for a feeling. It asks for vulnerability. And vulnerability for an avoidant is a calculated risk, one they're rarely willing to take without absolute certainty it's safe. They've built their emotional world like a fortress. To say I love you would be to open a gate that's been bolted for years. Even if they feel it somewhere deep inside, admitting it would mean committing to a depth of connection that terrifies them. Here's what's dangerous. If you're not careful, their hesitation will make you doubt your worth. You'll start believing love should be something you prove yourself into. That if you just give more, do more, be more, they'll finally hand over those words like a prize. But love that has to be extracted under pressure isn't love you can count on. And here's the shift. When you stop trying to hear love and start watching for how it's shown, you get a truer read on where you stand. Does their care show up in actions? Does their presence feel secure? Or do you feel like you're constantly on trial? Avoidants may say less, but their behavior writes its own story. If the story is inconsistent, you don't need the words to know the truth. Because do you love me isn't just a question for them, it's a mirror for you. If you have to keep asking it, you already know more than you want to admit. And that's not a sign to work harder to get the answer. That's a sign to start asking yourself a different question. Am I willing to live in a love that feels this uncertain? Send this to someone who's been stuck in this dynamic for far too long. Another question that almost always gets tangled in their silence is, what are you afraid of? You might ask it during a quiet night together, when the walls feel lower, hoping they'll finally let you in. Or you might ask it in the middle of tension, trying to bridge the gap by offering safety, and you mean it. You're not mocking, you're not prying, you're extending a hand. But instead of taking it, They retreat behind vague statements. I'm not afraid of anything, or they'll pivot. Why would you think I'm afraid? But avoidance thrives in the shadows. The very act of naming fear is, for them, like stepping into a spotlight they never asked for. They're not practiced in unpacking what's inside. Fear, for them, isn't an emotion to share. It's a signal to shut down, to minimize, to escape before the feeling takes root. And this is where your heart can start to ache. Because you can see the fear. You can feel it in the moments they stiffen, when closeness grows, in how they dodge future talk, in how they pick small fights right when things are good. You can sense that there's a soft, scared part of them hidden under all that armor, and you might believe that if you could just get them to admit it, everything would change. But here's the truth. Naming fear doesn't guarantee healing it. Avoidants often fear the very process of vulnerability that healing requires. And until they're ready to confront that on their own terms, your questions will only hit the surface. So the shift here is moving from trying to pull their fear into the open to deciding how much of your life you want to live with someone who won't face it. Fear is human. Avoidance of fear is a choice. And someone else's choice to keep their walls intact doesn't have to keep you locked outside. When you stop making their fear your responsibility, you get to see more clearly what's yours to carry and what was never yours at all. Then there steps the question that hangs in the air like a dare. Where do you see this going? You ask it because you need to know what you're building toward. Because love without direction starts to feel like a slow leak you can't patch. You're not asking for a proposal. You're not asking for a 5-year plan. You're asking for clarity, for shared vision, for the basic dignity of knowing if the time you're giving is leading somewhere. And yet, with an avoidant, this question often drops like a stone into deep water. No splash, no ripples, just gone. They'll say, I don't think that far ahead, or let's just see what happens, as if that's a sign of being laid back instead of a way to avoid commitment. You might even get the non-answer that sounds like wisdom. I just want to enjoy the moment. But here's the thing. Enjoying the moment isn't the same as investing in a future. The truth is, answering this question would require them to take a stand, to say, I want this to grow, or this is as far as I can go. Either way, the answer would define the relationship. And for someone who fears being trapped, that kind of definition feels like a cage. So they'll keep it hazy because haze is easier to exit than a door with a lock. And here's where the shift happens for you. Instead of treating their avoidance as a mystery to solve, you treat it as a decision they've already made. If someone won't define the relationship, they are defining it, just not in the way you want. Indecision is a decision. Silence is an answer. This is where your power kicks in. You get to decide if your life, your love, and your dreams are worth living in a maybe. You get to ask yourself, am I willing to build my heart on ground they refuse to claim? When you start valuing clarity over comfort, you stop settling for answers that keep you in limbo. Because a relationship without direction isn't neutral, it's drifting. And when you stop drifting, you start choosing. The final question they can seem to answer is the one that could change everything. What do you want? Not what they'll tolerate. Not what they'll settle for in the moment. Not what feels convenient right now. You're asking about desire, vision, the truth of what they're actually seeking in love, in life, in connection. And yet, more often than not, this question is met with hesitation, deflection, or a quick turn back to you. What do you want? They'll say, as if volleying the question back will buy them time. But it's not time they need. It's permission they've never given themselves to actually know what they want without fear of the cost. Because here's the thing, wanting is dangerous to an avoidant. To want means to risk disappointment. To want means you might have to need. And to need means opening yourself up to the possibility of not getting it. For someone who's built their identity on self-sufficiency, that risk can feel unbearable. And so they keep their desires vague, their plans undefined, their deeper longings hidden even from themselves. Because if they don't name it, they can't lose it. But here's what you have to see. When someone can't name what they want, they can't consciously choose you, and that's not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their readiness. If you keep asking this question, hoping they'll eventually name you, you might miss the truth staring you in the face. People who don't know what they want will keep you in limbo while they figure it out. The shift here is radical and freeing. Stop waiting for them to decide and start living as if your life is already in motion. Wanting clearly for yourself is the antidote to their vagueness. It pulls you out of their fog and back into your own focus. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to choose the life you want, even if it means walking away from the one they can't. Because the most powerful answer you'll ever get isn't from them, it's from you. When you step back and look at it, all the questions they couldn't answer, a pattern starts to reveal itself. It's not random. It's not about you asking the wrong way. It's not even about timing. It's about a person who has built their life around not being fully seen and the walls they've built to make sure it stays that way. They couldn't tell you what they needed because needing meant risking. They couldn't tell you why they pulled away because distance is their comfort zone. They couldn't say, I love you without feeling the ground shift under them. They couldn't name what they feared because that would make it real. They couldn't tell you where this was going because that would make them accountable. And they couldn't tell you what they wanted because wanting would make them vulnerable. And here's the thing. Every one of those silences was information. You were being given answers the whole time, just not in the form you were hoping for. The absence was the answer. The deflection was the answer. The hesitation, the vagueness, the redirection, all of it was their truth, spoken without words. The old version of you might have chased harder, worked harder, waited longer, telling yourself that love means patience, that closeness takes time, that if you just keep showing up, they'll eventually meet you there. But the version of you that's waking up now understands something different. Love without reciprocity isn't love. You can stand on, you don't have to punish them, you don't have to make them wrong, but you do have to see them clearly. And once you do, the question shifts from why won't they answer me to why am I staying in a place where my questions can't be answered? That's the question that changes everything. Because here's your quiet truth. You deserve answers. You deserve clarity. You deserve a love that doesn't make you decode it. And if that's not available here, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means you're done living in rooms where the doors stay locked. So you walk forward not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring enough about yourself to stop waiting. And that says when the most important question becomes the simplest one. What do I want now? And if you've been nodding along to this, feeling that shift in your chest, then subscribe, not for me, but for you. Because this is only the beginning of what happens when you stop listening for the answers they won't give and start living in the ones you give yourself.